Sometimes, the deepest loneliness does not happen when no one is there. It happens in the middle of connection, in the soft glow of shared evenings, in the familiar sound of someone asking how your day was, in the warmth of arms around you, while some quiet place inside remains cold. This kind of emptiness is difficult to explain. It does not always look like pain. Sometimes it looks like functioning, smiling, replying, staying. Sometimes it looks like love, from the outside. But inside, there is a hollow space that never seems to fill, a distance that remains, even when someone stands very close. And often, the emptiness is not caused by the relationship alone. Sometimes, it is older than the person you love, older than the language you use to describe love. A pattern shaped before you ever knew what intimacy was. A silence learned so early, it began to feel like the self, the shape of absence. There are people who can sit across from someone they care for deeply and still feel alone, not abandoned, not rejected, just untouched in some invisible place. They talk, they listen, they go through the rituals of closeness. Good morning messages, shared meals, familiar laughter. The small gestures that usually mean intimacy is alive. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface, something remains unlit. They leave conversations feeling more tired than comforted. They are held, but do not feel held. They are loved, but cannot fully arrive where love is waiting. This is one of the most confusing emotional experiences a person can have, because emptiness in relationships does not always announce itself dramatically. It rarely says, "This is broken." More often, it whispers. It shows up as numbness after tenderness, irritation after affection, a lingering restlessness after time together. It can feel like guilt, because nothing is obviously wrong. The other person may be kind, present, trying, and still, the heart stays quiet. So the mind begins to ask dangerous questions. Why can't this satisfy me? Why do I feel distant when nothing bad is happening? Why does love land on me like rain on sealed glass? At first, many people blame the relationship. That is understandable. Human beings search for visible causes. They assume the emptiness must mean incompatibility, boredom, emotional mismatch, or the slow erosion of feeling. Sometimes that is true, but not always. Sometimes the relationship is not the original wound. It is only the place where the wound becomes impossible to ignore. Because love has a way of revealing what daily life can hide. It brings old expectations to the surface, old fears, old absences. It asks the nervous system questions it answered long ago, in another home, with other faces, under other conditions. And the body often responds before words can catch up. A person may think they want closeness more than anything, then feel strangely numb when it arrives. They may crave reassurance, then feel almost nothing when it is given. They may stay near someone, while emotionally living miles away. This is the shape of absence, not always visible, not always loud, but deeply real. And for many, this is where the story begins. Not with the loss of love, but with the painful realization that even in love, something essential still feels missing. Where the hunger began. No one begins life knowing how to receive love. That ability is learned slowly, through repetition, through tone of voice, through attunement, through the quiet miracle of being responded to, not just cared for. A child does not ask whether they are worthy in abstract terms. They learn it through experience, through whether their fear is soothed, whether their joy is welcomed, whether their sadness is met with presence or discomfort. This is how the emotional blueprint begins. And when those early experiences are inconsistent, absent, conditional, or emotionally thin, something subtle takes root. A child may be fed, dressed, and protected, yet still grow up emotionally unseen. They may learn that feelings are inconvenient, that vulnerability changes the atmosphere in the room, that comfort must be earned, that their inner world is too much, too messy, too unimportant to bring fully into the light. Some children grow up around affection that is unpredictable. Love is there, then gone. Warmth appears, then disappears without explanation. Approval depends on performance, obedience, calmness, usefulness. The child adapts. They become watchful, careful, skilled at reading others, skilled at shrinking needs before those needs can be refused. Other children grow up too early. They become self-contained, not because they are strong, but because no one came reliably enough for weakness to feel safe. They stop asking, stop expecting, stop reaching in obvious ways. To the outside world, this can look like maturity, but often it is loneliness, wearing a disciplined face. And loneliness, when learned young, becomes more than an emotion. It becomes a way of organizing the self. By adulthood, the original circumstances may be gone. The house is gone. The voices are gone. The years have passed. But the emotional logic remains. The heart still moves according to old instructions. Do not need too much. Do not trust warmth too quickly. Do not assume love will know what to do with your inner life. So when intimacy appears later, it meets a nervous system shaped by memory. Not always conscious memory. Sometimes something older, more cellular than verbal. A memory of what happened when you reached, or when no one noticed that you needed to. This is why emptiness in relationships can feel so disproportionate, so mysterious, so hard to explain to the person beside you. They think they are meeting you here, in the present, but some part of you is still standing in the past, waiting to see if this love will also fade, miss, overwhelm, or fail to arrive. And that old hunger does not disappear just because someone is kind. Sometimes, kindness is what makes the hunger ache more clearly. The mind protects itself. The human mind is not built only to seek connection. It is also built to survive it. This is where psychology enters the story with unusual tenderness, because what looks confusing from the outside often makes perfect sense inside the nervous system. A person may wonder why they feel empty with someone who treats them well, but the deeper question is not why are they failing to feel love. The deeper question is, what has their system learned to do in order to stay safe? Attachment theory offers one part of the answer. Early relationships shape how closeness is expected, interpreted, and endured. When connection has been inconsistent, intrusive, neglectful, or emotionally unreliable, the body becomes cautious. It may long for intimacy, but it does not automatically trust intimacy. This is not weakness, it is adaptation. For some, that adaptation becomes anxiety. They reach constantly, fearing distance. For others, it becomes emotional shutdown. They stay present physically, but flatten internally. They disconnect from need, before need can expose them to disappointment. They become composed, competent, and hard to reach, even to themselves. Over time, emotional numbing can feel normal. The brain does this for a reason. If feeling deeply once led to pain, rejection, overwhelm, or abandonment, then reduced feeling becomes protective. It is not that the heart disappears, it is that access to it becomes guarded. The person still wants intimacy, but their internal alarm system may register closeness as risk rather than rest. So love arrives, and instead of warmth, there is blankness. Instead of relief, there is unease. Instead of fullness, there is the old familiar distance. This can be especially painful because the person often believes they should feel grateful, certain, complete. When they do not, shame begins to form around the gap. But shame only deepens disconnection. It interprets a survival pattern as a moral failure. Psychology suggests something gentler. What if emptiness is not the absence of love, but the presence of protection? What if numbness is not indifference, but the nervous system holding its breath? What if the inability to feel deeply in connection is not because the heart is cold, but because the heart learned that openness required too much? The body remembers what the mind has forgotten. It remembers unpredictability. It remembers emotional weather. It remembers when tenderness came with tension. It remembers when being known did not lead to safety. And because of that, even real love may take time to register. Not because it is insufficient, but because the inner world is translating the present through the language of the past, wanting love, resisting love. One of the most painful truths about human intimacy is this: a person can ache for closeness and still resist it with all their strength. This contradiction often lives beneath awareness. On the surface, they want love. They pursue it. They think about it. They build their lives around the hope of finally finding someone who feels like home. But once intimacy begins asking for something real, dependence, honesty, softness, emotional exposure. Something inside starts to pull away, not always outwardly. Sometimes the resistance is silent. They stop sharing what they feel. They become harder to impress, harder to soothe. They begin to overanalyze small changes in tone. They offer care easily, but struggle to receive it. They become hyper-independent in the very place they most want to rest. This is how self-protection disguises itself as personality. Some people become the strong one, the one who needs very little, the one who can understand others with exquisite sensitivity, while remaining vague about their own pain. Others become perpetual givers, trying to earn the depth of love they cannot simply trust. They anticipate, accommodate, and emotionally labor for the relationship, hoping that if they are valuable enough, they will finally feel secure inside it. But security cannot be built only through usefulness, and love cannot fully enter a heart that believes its needs are dangerous. That belief often lives quietly. It says, if you need too much, you will be left. If you lean, you will become weak. If you reveal your emptiness, someone will see how unlovable it is. So the person edits themselves. They remain almost open, almost honest, almost surrendered. And this almost becomes the tragedy. Because the relationship may continue for years in this form, functional, stable, even affectionate, yet the emptiness remains because the self has never fully arrived inside the bond. Love is touching the surface, while the deeper self stays hidden behind old emotional armor. Then resentment begins to grow. They may resent the other person for not reaching what they themselves have buried. They may resent the relationship for failing to heal wounds it was never allowed to truly touch. They may feel trapped between longing and resistance, blaming love for the very distances self-protection keeps creating. This is not hypocrisy. It is fear with a long history. And fear, especially relational fear, rarely sounds dramatic. It sounds reasonable. It says, stay composed, stay careful, stay unreadable. Do not collapse into need. Do not trust too much. Do not believe this will hold. So the person remains in relationship, but not in surrender, in connection, but not in contact, wanting to be met, while guarding the door to the room where they actually live, the moment of recognition. At some point, if a person is fortunate enough to pause long enough, a different question begins to emerge. Not, why am I so hard to love? Not, why is this person not enough? But something quieter, more honest. What exactly is this emptiness asking me to notice? This is the beginning of recognition, and recognition is powerful because it softens the old instinct to accuse. Until this point, the emptiness may have been interpreted in 100 painful ways, as incompatibility, as emotional defect, as boredom, as evidence that love itself is a disappointment. But eventually, a more spacious understanding becomes possible. The feeling is not random. It has a history, a pattern, a logic. It may be the echo of a younger self who learned to live without attunement. It may be the grief of all the emotions once left unmirrored. It may be the body's way of saying, even now, you do not fully believe someone can stay with the truth of you. When this realization arrives, it often brings sadness before relief, because awareness means seeing how long the pattern has been there, how many relationships were filtered through old fear, how many moments of genuine care were dismissed, mistrusted, or simply unfelt, how often the person stood at the edge of intimacy and called the distance fate, when part of that distance was inherited. But there is tenderness in this grief. For the first time, the emptiness is no longer just a problem to fix or a flaw to hide. It becomes a message. Not always a clear one, not always an easy one, but meaningful, human, connected to something real. This is also where blame begins to loosen. Not because the relationship is automatically innocent. Some relationships truly are emotionally insufficient. Some partners are unavailable, avoidant, cruel, or incapable of depth. Recognition does not erase that truth, but it adds another layer. It asks whether the emptiness belongs only to the present, or whether the present has awakened something much older. This changes everything, because once a person sees the pattern, they no longer have to worship it. They no longer have to confuse familiarity with truth. They can begin to separate what is happening now from what was once endured then. And this is the first movement toward wholeness. To realize that the hollow feeling inside love may not mean the heart is broken beyond repair. It may mean the heart is finally telling the truth. Learning to feel full healing relational emptiness rarely looks dramatic. It does not usually arrive as revelation, then disappear forever. More often, it begins in very small moments. A pause before withdrawing. A breath before dismissing tenderness. The ability to notice numbness without immediately obeying it. The quiet courage of staying present with an emotion that once required shutting down. This is how fullness begins. Not as intensity, not as constant happiness, but as contact. First, contact with the self, because many people who feel empty in relationships have spent years organized around adaptation, reading others, managing atmospheres, minimizing needs, being easy to carry. Healing asks something different. It asks for a return to the inner world, not to control it, not to perfect it, but simply to know it, to become intimate with what is actually there: grief, hunger, fear, longing, tenderness, anger, exhaustion. What has been unfelt cannot be integrated, and often, underneath emptiness, there is grief. Grief for what was not given. Grief for the child who learned to perform steadiness. Grief for the years spent mistaking emotional survival for personality. This grief matters. It softens the old structure. It tells the truth without punishment. Then, slowly, safety begins to matter more than performance. A person starts to understand that not every relationship can hold healing. Some dynamics repeat the wound. Some people reward emotional disappearance. Some forms of love feel familiar only because they resemble old scarcity. Fullness requires environments where the nervous system is not constantly bracing, where honesty does not create danger, where tenderness is not used as leverage. In such spaces, receiving becomes possible, and receiving is often harder than giving. To receive love means allowing warmth to land without immediately questioning it. It means letting care matter, letting comfort count, letting another person touch the places once hidden behind competence or charm or silence. This can feel unbearably vulnerable at first, but over time, the body learns through repetition what it was not taught early enough. Closeness can be steady, need can be survivable, presence can remain. The emptiness may not vanish all at once. Some days it will return, with its old familiar ache, but now it is met differently. Not as prophecy, not as proof that love has failed, but as a tender signal that some part of the self still needs gentleness, truth, and time. This is healing, not becoming someone who never feels hollow, but becoming someone who no longer abandons themselves inside the hollow place. Love after numbness. There is a quieter kind of love that begins after recognition, not the fantasy of being completed, not the desperate hope that another person will finally silence every old ache, but something softer, slower, more human. It begins when a person stops asking love to do the entire work of repairing the past. This does not mean settling for less. It means seeing more clearly. It means understanding that relationships are not empty because they fail to behave like magic. They become empty when the self is absent within them, when old fear edits every exchange, when the heart waits to be rescued instead of gradually returning to its own depths. Love after numbness feels different. It may still contain uncertainty, it may still awaken old sorrow, but there is more presence now, more honesty, more ability to notice what is happening without collapsing into it. Affection is no longer measured only by intensity, but by steadiness, by emotional truth, by whether two people can remain real in each other's presence. And this changes the texture of intimacy. A hand on the shoulder means more. A silence becomes less threatening. A simple question is allowed to be genuine. Warmth no longer has to arrive like lightning to be believed. There is also more humility here. A person begins to understand that no relationship can permanently protect them from every old wound. Even the most loving bond will brush against ancient absences. But now, when that happens, the emptiness is less lonely. It has context, language, compassion. It is no longer a nameless void swallowing everything good. It is part of the emotional weather, and weather can be witnessed without becoming the whole sky. This is what healing gives back. Not perfection, not certainty, but the ability to stay with the self, to stay with complexity, to stay in love without disappearing inside it. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps fullness was never meant to feel like constant emotional completion. Perhaps it is something gentler than that, something quieter, the feeling of no longer begging the world to fill a place that first needed to be understood. So if you have felt empty in relationships, it does not necessarily mean you are broken. It does not necessarily mean you are impossible to reach, or destined to remain untouched by love. It may only mean that some part of you learned emptiness before it ever learned safety. And now, at last, that part is asking not to be judged, but to be seen.